of Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. So we decided in consultation with John that we would try to get as many Kilo, 3, 4, and closely connected Marines from that experience here. We've got 5 members of the panel, and I'll just give a very brief introduction, and then they will give their own spiels about their backgrounds, how they got into the Corps, what they did in Vietnam, etc. John, in the meantime, had to withdraw from the conference. I'm taking over for him. Hopefully I'll do a passing job of this. Once we've introduced the 5 panelists, we're then going to show an approximately 12-minute video clip from a CBS News documentary that first aired on October 1, 1967 on national television. It is called The Ordeal of Con Tien, and it is based on film work and reporting that John Lawrence and his cameraman did during the month of September in 1967 when some of these gentlemen were there at Con Tien. I should also add that we've got something like a total of 14 Kilo Company 3-4 veterans here who were in Vietnam in that general fall of 67, early 68 time frame, although they were not all at Con Tien. There are some in the audience, not on the panel, who were at Con Tien, so hopefully that's not too confusing of a situation. So first of all, I wanted to introduce Captain Ned LeRoy, and I'll just say briefly that Captain Ned LeRoy took over as commanding officer of Kilo 3-4 at Con Tien in early September 1967. He remained commanding officer until late April of 1968. And then in a few minutes, I'll let him actually tell you much more in much more detail, and probably more accurately as well, about his time there. Next to him is Lieutenant Phil Place, who was the executive officer for Kilo Company 3-4 from the fall of 1967, that is after 3-4 had rotated out of Con Tien, through most of the spring and summer of 1968. So he and Captain LeRoy were running the ship, I guess, in a certain definition. Next is Sergeant Paul Burton, who was with H&S Company 3-4 Marines, but who worked very closely with the infantry companies as a 106 millimeter recoilless rifle team member. Paul had also done, I think, 2 previous tours in Saigon as a Marine attached to, under the State Department, attached to Embassy Security in Saigon. Is that correct? So he has an interesting perspective of someone who went to Vietnam as a Marine as early as 65 in a, I wouldn't describe that as a combat role, would you? Although I guess in 68 it became more of a combat role. And then who came back to Vietnam in 68, right at the beginning of the Tet Offensive is when his combat tour began to serve with 3-4. Fourth is Corporal Alan Willyerd, who was a squad leader with 1st Platoon of Kilo Company. His tour started in about the middle of November of 1967, so he missed Con Tien, but he was there during the Tet Offensive. He was also there during the movement of the battalion out to help defend the hills around Khe Sanh as the base was being evacuated and closed. And then, last but not least, Corpsman Bob Wilson of the Navy, who was assigned with Ron Smith almost at the same time or same day as corpsman with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines in early July of 1967, just as the battalion was moving into or settling in, if that's an appropriate word to use, at Con Tien. And I should add that Bob and Ron both were awarded the Bronze Star Medal with Combat V for actions that they took at Con Tien, I believe in September of 67, August of 67, as described in the James Cohen book, Con Tien, if any of you have read that. We're going to show the 12-minute video. We're then going to let the panel members introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their service. And then in about the last 15 minutes of this panel discussion, I'm going to introduce to you Cadet Sortino, who is VMI class of 2016. He's already a member of the Marine Corps. He's passed OCS. He'll be graduating with a commission as a second lieutenant in May of this year. and he'll be attending TBS probably before the end of 2016. And we thought it was very appropriate because you've heard from a number of gentlemen here who graduated with commission or who obtained or received their commissions as second lieutenants in the Marine Corps from TBS 367 in the fall of 1966. Cadet Sortino is going to obtain his commission as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in 2016. 50 years separated from a number of the guys that are in the audience and have spoken from Cadet Sortino, and about the same separation from these gentlemen on the panel. So with that, I think we'll roll the 12-minute video, and I'm going to take a seat, and then we'll have the introductions of the panel members after that.
Because of the following CBS News special report, the program normally seen at this time
Because of the following CBS News special report,
the program normally seen at this time will not be presented today.
What's that?
Where is it?
We can't reach those big guns, and they just keep dropping in. There's nothing you can do. It's just like being a big bullseye on top of a hill, and you're just sitting there waiting. You can't be safe. You can be lucky. That's it.
you can't be safe, you can be lucky.
That's it.
Stuff landing all over, bouncing off you, and you get just as scared every time. And it gets worse. The closer they get, the more they throw. The more you get scared. When you get up, it's a wonderful feeling just to be alive, to be able to walk around after one of those.
If I live 100 years, I'll just never, ever be able to tell the story the way it really happened. These young kids who, you just run up to them, and when we were all boxed in, they were all around, and they were all over our perimeter, and we're throwing grenades, and I got pretty close, and just run up to one of these kids and say, Marine, we're going to get out of here, aren't we? And the kid look up to you and say, you're damn right we are, Skipper.
Those Marines are talking about a place named Con Tien, an obscure American outpost in Vietnam, as Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Guadalcanal were once obscure. Con Tien is a bitterly exposed target just 2 miles below the DMZ. American Marines have been under fire there since last May. In just the last 4 weeks, they have suffered over 70 dead, 1,000 wounded. In the next half hour, we shall examine the ordeal of Con Tien.
This is a CBS News special report. The ordeal of Con Tien. This broadcast is brought to you by West. Here is CBS News correspondent Mike Wallace.
Con Tien is here, 2 miles south of the demilitarized zone at the narrow top of South Vietnam, 12 miles inland from the South China Sea. It is a desolate hilltop collection of guns and bunkers looking north across the DMZ into North Vietnam. Its crucial importance lies in the fact that it's on a main infiltration route into the south. The loss of Con Tien could help open the way for the estimated 35,000 communist troops now massed in the DMZ area. Its loss would block the construction of that electronic barrier along the DMZ to seal off South Vietnam from the north. But more than that, its loss would give the North Vietnamese that one big, elusive propaganda victory they've been searching for at such a cost in lives. They would prize a victory at Con Tien as a miniature replica of their victory over the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Con Tien is vulnerable. It is the least defensible of any of the American outposts because it's so close to North Vietnamese territory. The enemy artillery, about 100 big guns plus mortars and rockets, can pound Con Tien around the clock with devastating effect. And our ground troops cannot go into North Vietnam to knock out those guns. For the Marines at Con Tien, this is what it's like.
Go hear him whistle over your head. He went off. Damn, I'm making sure to get down there. Better keep it.
Emergency medevac, ASAP. Chopper over.
All right, somebody take time to wait on it.
Put your arm around it.
Make sure I can hear the radio.
Hey, how many give you hand? Yeah, on the way, cut. Okay, take it easy. Keep your head down, okay?
Take it easy, Red. Hey, you want me to call 6 and tell them to get a medevac on the way? Wait a minute. You got more on the camera?
Right.
You went to Glenmore. Yeah, boot.
Wait a minute, let him get a...
God, that's a crash pile this morning.
Six 80100. Start from 680100. 680100.
Roger. 81 should be able to see that as well, isn't it, Wave? Let's get him on there. Over.
Hey, look, you can't get a grid out of Burton.
Okay, look, here are the two tacks. Do you see them?
Yes, sir.
Do you see where that smoke is?
Sure.
The smoke landed about 300 meters, right where that big tree is out there. 300 to 400 meters. Southeast of the town. Okay, where's that intro?
I'd say they're probably...
What happened to your squad?
They was hit. Most of them was hit by shrapnel, and there was medevac.
Well, tell me, you came here at full strength?
I had 13 men when I came.
And it's 4 days later now, and how many are still here?
6.
I think we're just occupying ground and losing too many men. I'm losing too many men. If we were to stay here too much longer, we wouldn't have much left of this platoon, let alone the company. I see, what, about 3, 4 people get it a day. Not real bad, but enough to be medevac. Cut my platoon down.
Well, isn't that all part of war, as the generals say?
Sure it is, but for 7 months up here, 1 battalion ain't going to have much left if that's part of war. That'll rotate a little more, I think. Send us back where we can get new men and train them. See, we're getting new men out here. They're coming out, well, what you might call green, and then they don't know really how to act.
The rifles have been jamming, the mud's been, has slowed everything down, and the artillery comes in everywhere, and it just gets pretty futile and frustrating sometimes.
The really depressing part about it is, like, there isn't really much you can do, you know what I mean? You see the rounds come in, you see your buddies get blown away and wounded and stuff like that.
Well, I can't say that I'm scared stiff, but I'm scared. I mean, after a while, you know it's going to come. And you can't do nothing about it. And you just look to God. It's about the only thing you can do.
Well, do you get any idea from up around Contienne how the war is going? Yes. If we don't get some more people up in this area real quick, and we don't get some more B-52s real fast, then these people are going to be all the way down to Da Nang before anybody knows it. Does everybody agree with that? 100%.
What kind of support are the Marines getting? General Westmoreland says the Americans are responding with the greatest concentration of conventional firepower in history. The U.S. artillery fire is 10 times greater than the enemy's. It comes from Dong Ha, Cam Lo, Jolin, the other outpost corners of what is called Leatherneck Square, and from these big guns at Camp Carroll. The batteries fire off as many as 10,000 shells daily, lobbing them over the heads of the men at Contienne deep into the demilitarized zone. And then there are the B-52 bombers striking from nearby Thailand. They pound the zone day in, day out with tons of explosives.
I tried to highlight with my laser pointer in a couple of places in there. First of all, that was John Lawrence on camera doing a number of those interviews with Keith Kay, his cameraman. Also, that was Lieutenant Colonel Bendel, who was a 3-4 commander, commanding officer, at one time directing artillery fire out to the west of Contienne. So with that background, I just wanted to let each of the panel members say whatever they would like about their background prior to their military service, the factors that led them into the Marine Corps. A lot of people consider the Gulf of Tonkin incident as sort of an official boundary between the pre-Vietnam era and the post-Vietnam era, August 5th, 1964. For all of the 5 panelists, whether they went in before that or after that, was the Vietnam conflict on their horizon, or was it a factor in whether they went in, either through the draft or other mechanisms? And just tell us a little bit about their military service and anything they'd like to say. Oh yeah, the map. Sorry. These are 2 maps from James Cohen's book with his permission. This is Leatherneck Square. So Contienne was referred to in the McNamara line terminology as A4. Yankee Station we just were discussing with Bob Wilson the other night. C2 Bridge is also known as the Washout. C2 or Charlie 2 was one of the fire support bases of the McNamara line. C3 or Camlo Hill was another fire support base. And then going east toward the ocean, you had A2, which was Jilin, which you've heard mentioned in earlier talks today. A3 was a new base located right beneath this, I believe it was about a 600-yard wide strip of earth called the Trace. The marketplace that Frank Labuti referred to this morning is indicated right here. And that gives you a general picture of the McNamara line in terms of the A and the C bases. And then over here, there's more of a focus on Contienne itself. And everywhere you see a little exploding sign, that's where there was an engagement between 1966 and 1968 with the NVA and the Marines. So, Captain LeRoy, please.
I can identify with that Marine that you saw on the first screen of that clip. I found myself in that position most of the time while I was over there in Vietnam, hugging Mother Earth. My name is Ned LeRoy. I'm from Simsbury, Connecticut, born and raised. I graduated Williams College in 1960. At that time, we were looking at the Berlin crisis, and as I graduated, I was facing the possibility of being drafted into the Army. And with all due respect to my Army acquaintances, I didn't want any part of that. Part of it was my own feeling, and part of it was that my older brother was a Marine. And then after me, my younger brother was a Marine also, and he also served in Vietnam. So then I enlisted in the Marine Corps and went to Parris Island. As a college graduate, my older brother recommended that I go ahead and apply for OCS. So while I was a recruit at Parris Island, my orders came in for OCS, and you can imagine the kind of abuse I received from especially a PFC who was supervising us on mess duty, who kept really leaning into my ear saying, "You're too slow, Lieutenant." Well, I got through that, into the 30th OC class in early 1962, was commissioned in May of 62, and I was a member of the basic class of 562. We had a little more choice at that time in selecting our MOSs than you may have heard from the people who came later. And I elected to be an 0302 infantry officer. And my first assignment was aboard the USS Essex, CVS 9 carrier out of Quonset Point, Rhode Island, as the executive officer of the ship's detachment. That was a year tour, followed by a year at Camp Lejeune with the 2nd Marines, and then 2 years as the general's aide at the old Marine Corps supply activity in Philadelphia. By that time, I had been promoted to captain, and I received my orders to Vietnam. Joined 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines in Okinawa in around April of 1967, and was assigned duties as the S4. And we entered Vietnam in early May of 1967 for Operation Hickory, I believe. I think that being the S4 prior to taking command of an infantry company was a great advantage for me, for I could learn a lot from the guys who were in the companies, out in the field, and I got a lot of input. I think that helped make me a better commander. We were located, I took over the company, I should say, took over Kilo Company in September 7th of 1967, and from that time forward, we visited most of the sites that Al pointed out to you in Leatherneck Square. I think the only place we weren't at was the C2 Bridge. Is that about right? We were at Jiolin at the top end of Route 1 during Tet. We did not receive any ground attacks there. We did a lot of patrolling. We received increasingly amount of artillery, rocket, mortar, flat trajectory 85 and 100 millimeter gun incoming that kept us pinned down quite a bit of the time. There was a large NVA unit ambushed a company of, I believe it was Lima 33 to our west between us and A3, and they took a large number of casualties, which we picked up by tanks with the help of Lieutenant Giardina. Where are you, Ed? In the back. He took his platoon out, picked up all the dead on tanks and brought them in, and we put them in one of the die marker bunkers. And but it was a long time before we could get them out of there, and that became quite a leadership problem right there and a morale problem for the troops who had to be there at that time. I departed Vietnam in April of that year, and went to Quantico and put through an OC class. Then I joined Jerry Paul over there for AWS class. And then my friend John Ripley. So who mentioned John Ripley over here? One of the speakers from the beginning. And John Ripley assigned me to OSO duty, Officer Selection Officer duty in San Francisco. And that was in 1969, and that's where I took most of my abuse from the students at Cal Berkeley, for example, Sacramento State, etc. A good friend of mine, Don Frank, who was also on OSO duty, was at Cornell and had a gallon of paint dumped on him in his dress blue uniform. So those, I never was spat upon, but there was a lot of verbal abuse. We had some of our literature taken off our display table when we were out on campus that was set afire. There were bonfires going occasionally in front of us there. After I had various assignments, you might think it was a lousy assignment I got as a CO of the Marine Barracks in Adak, Alaska. And people asked me what I had done to deserve that. But it was a good experience and a great opportunity because there were not many commands at that time for a major. And at that point, I had been promoted to major. Came back, went to Okinawa, and then came back from Okinawa and finished my career at Headquarters Marine Corps and retired in 1983.
My name is Brad Place. I currently live in Denver, Colorado, and I graduated from Texas A&M University, where I was a member of the Cadet Corps there for 4 years. When I first entered into the PLC program, I thought that having attended a military school and learning how to drill and call cadence and do all of the things that you typically learn at PLCs, I thought going to PLCs with that knowledge would be a big advantage. It turned out I was wrong. Nobody there appreciated what I knew, and we started over with the basics and learned it the right way. It was a valuable experience. I spent 2 summers at PLC camp, graduated from A&M in January of '67, and went back to the basic school where I was in basic class 567. And once again, I miscalculated. I thought that because I was now a second lieutenant, it was going to get easier, and I found out it not only wasn't, it didn't. I took a little leave following the basic school and went to Vietnam, whereupon I was assigned to Kilo Company 3-4 and joined Captain LeRoy and was initially given weapons platoon. 2 other lieutenants joined the company the same day, and so I took the weapons platoon and shortly thereafter became the XO of Kilo Company. I went to Vietnam in October of '67, came home in November of '68, and then when I came back to the U.S., I went to Camp Pendleton, where I was a company commander for the balance of my time in the Marine Corps, which totaled 3 years ultimately.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Burton. I graduated from high school in Wiesbaden, Germany. I was a Marine sergeant. I don't need that damn thing. Oh, okay. So I do it anyway. Yes, sir. My father was a colonel in the Air Force. Was brought up in a military family. When I joined the Marine Corps in the summer of 1963, after graduating, unlike many of the speakers today who talked about how their families were upset, he started laughing. He passed away in September of 2014, and he was still laughing. Actually, my father and I served together in Vietnam, I was selected for embassy duty after 2 years in the Marine Corps Infantry and served in Saigon in the Marine Detachment there on embassy duty from October 1965 to October 1967. My father came in country into Tonsanut Air Base on Veterans Day 1966. Myself and 2 other corporals picked him up at the airport in the ambassador's car. Those of you who went through Tonsanut may know that if you were below the rank of a field grade officer, then you sat on your sea bag for 3 days. And before you got your assignment, I went up to the captain that was in charge there, told him we were taking Colonel Burton with us and that they were to call the embassy when they had his assignment. He said, "Yes, sir." I enjoyed that. He became the commanding officer of the munitions maintenance squadron at Benoit, so we spent a year visiting and going to embassy parties. So it was pretty tough duty. After 2 years in Saigon, I returned to the States, trained 200 young hard chargers, took them through jungle warfare school, returned to Vietnam, reported to 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, H&S Company on the 4th of February, 1968. Spent 11 and a half months in country, was wounded on Hill 689 on the 15th of May, 68. Got malaria in July of 1968 and decided that a college education sounded pretty good. I left the Marine Corps after 5.5 years of active duty in January 1969. Since that time, I've served as a school teacher, a principal, a school superintendent, graduated from law school at Southern Illinois University in 1997, and am currently serving as a judge pro tem in district court in King County, Washington. My boss is also a Vietnam veteran from the Navy, so we make a pretty good team. And I have no regrets.
My name is Alan Willyerd. I graduated from Haywood County High School in 1964, same place that Al graduated from. In '66, I joined the Marine Corps, and for 2 years. They had a delayed program, 120-day delayed, and I joined in '66. I went active in September, went to Paris Island, Camp Geiger, and they kind of went down the line, Vietnam, Lejeune, Vietnam, Lejeune. Well, I got to go to Lejeune, and we sailed over in the Mid, and while I was in the Mid, that's when the Greece military overthrew Greece, so we sailed over there. And then Israel and Egypt had their first 6-day war, so we went down there. We left over there in September, came back, went through jungle warfare school at Lejeune, got to Vietnam in sometime in the middle of November in that period of time. They had lost my papers. When I got to Okinawa, they said, "Who are you?" And I told them, they said, "Where are you trying to go?" I said, "Vietnam." So I stayed there about 3 weeks. Then I got to Vietnam and I went to Lieutenant Wimes's platoon in Kilo, and we was there at the washout, and I got there for the Tet Offensive, and then I went to Quezon, and so the 2 years that I was in the Marine Corps, if there was a hot spot anywhere in the world, you knew where I was. I was right in the middle of it. Came back, got out of the Marine Corps, and then started flying, and then I was a 40-year crop duster. So I always say wear cotton and eat rice. I'd like to say a couple words about a couple Marines that's not here today. Most of you know the first one, I think. Michael Red Reagan is the one that does the Warriors, the
Fallen Heroes.
Yeah, Fallen Heroes. my mind's blank. And he's done about 4,500 of those, and he's also doing some of the coalition. He just got through doing a bunch from Poland. You can go to his website, Michael Reagan. Well, the way I do it is Michael Reagan Artist. If you go to Michael Reagan, it says radio host. So go to Michael Reagan Artist and look at some of the work he done. It is absolutely phenomenal. He is some kind of artist. And also, while we was in Nam, Governor Ronald Reagan sent Red the California state flag. And he wanted me to bring it out here and get all Kilo and the Corpsmans and the AOs to sign the flag for him. So if you're Kilo and haven't signed his flag, I'll have it over there at Al's booth. And please come by and sign it, because that's the least we could do for Michael. And the next Marine that's not here is the best Marine I ever served with. And he was my first team squad, first team leader. His name was Richard L. Sadley. I always knew that if there was 100 NBA coming at us, and we only had 80 rounds, Rick was going to be right there by my side. He wasn't going to run. And I appreciated that from Rick. And he was coming down, but Tuesday he called me and said his doctor had advised against him coming down. So he said, at least you could do is give me a shout. So, hello, Rick. I love you, brother. And then someone else's, this is my chain of command right here. Captain LeRoy, Lieutenant Place, Lieutenant Wimes, and Lieutenant Whitler. The only one that's not here that would make up the full deal is a Captain Sid Thomas. When I went in the Marine Corps at Paris Island, we had M14s. I went to Geiger and we had M1s. And when I got to Vietnam, I looked down and I had a Matty Mattel plastic rifle. And I said, Lord, have mercy. So I went to Captain LeRoy. When I was 8 years old, my dad gave me a Model 12 Winchester. And I said, Captain LeRoy, can I carry a Winchester shotgun? No. Shucks. Well, then Captain Thomas come along. I said, Captain Thomas, can I carry a Model 12 Winchester? No. Double shucks. Well, when Al and Dan Moore got this together, Roanoke Times got in touch with them. And they wanted to do an article about this. And so Al sent them some stuff, and they wanted some pictures. So he sent them a handful of pictures, and the one that they picked out was a picture of me. And so then they wanted a caption, so Al put down, 21-year-old Corporal Alan Willyerd, photo taken on Hill 689, somewhere around June to August. So when it come out, paper come out Thursday. So we went to 7-Eleven and got them, carried them back to the room, started reading it. Well, the caption said, 21-year-old Colonel Alan Willyerd. And I said, So if today was in Vietnam, then I'll have to say, Captain LeRoy, Captain Thomas, I'll go get my own damn Model 12.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Wilson, and I was the one that was first at Quantico before I went to Vietnam. And it was the most wonderful duty station in 9 months of my life, I think. Well, before I got married and had grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. But Quantico, as most of you know, was a beautiful place, Potomac River. I was in Hospital Point. Couldn't go to Diamond Mills because I was an E2 at the time, and then became E3. And although I was dating a wave, I had to take her to the Dixie Pig, which was burgers and beer, because Diamond Mills was a little too expensive for my pocket. But I grew up. I was born and raised in Charleston, Illinois. After high school, graduated in '64, I started attending Eastern Illinois University. And to be quite frank, I was a little more interested in the girls than I was the academics. And I went the way of all people who spend more time with the girls than they do in the library and the classroom. Flunked out, which I'm not proud of, but there is more to the story. So I was just about to get drafted. And my best friend, Brian Doty, came over one evening and he says, hey, he says, we're both going to get drafted. He says, let's join the Navy. I said, fine. You make a decision for a lifetime in a second, at least when you're younger. And so Brian and I joined on the buddy plan. We went to Great Lakes, which is about 2 blocks from the Arctic Circle. It was cold as hell. We walked in after midnight, and one looked at the other. It had a record snowfall, and the temperature dropped to nothing then. And that's when we got there. And one of us looked at the other and said, we've just walked through the gates of, you know. So I went through boot camp, which I did not like. But after boot camp, I loved the Navy, and I loved being with the Marine Corps. I put Navy Corpsman down as my third choice because I flunked out of Eastern. Didn't plan to go back. Didn't feel worthy to go back. But I thought maybe I could become an X-ray tech and have a trade after getting out of the service. Well, the guy that was in classification, as you know, in boot camp, they're not exactly real gentle with your feelings. He said, oh, you want to be a corpsman? He said, we'll make you a corpsman. A lot of them are getting killed. And that is the God's truth. And I said, okay. And I have never regretted that decision since. But went through course, I'm sorry, if that's too offensive to some people's ears, tell me and I'll back off or I'll get closer. But anyway, after boot camp, went to course school, and then was got orders for Quantico, Virginia, at Hospital Point. I don't know how many of you remember that, but it was beautiful. It was right there on the lake, the river, and it was a beautiful building and a small contingent of hospital personnel, and you made a lot of good friends very quickly. After 9 months there, I got orders for Vietnam via Camp Lejeune, and I was expecting them. And actually, even though my parents were, my mom was really upset, but she kept it to herself. And I didn't want to tell her, and this is not 50 years after the fact, this is what I felt at the time. I'd like to go to Vietnam. I don't have a good reason for saying that, except that I was about 19 and wanted to see something, 19 or 20. So I went through course school. I went through Camp Lejeune, and then Vietnam, arrived there. And I want to tell you, everybody knows what a corpsman does, and I'm very proud to have done that. And I sincerely hope that I was able to make some people's lives better after they were sick or wounded, and I love the Marine Corps. But I've got to tell you just a few quick stories, and I won't keep it. I know your stomachs are probably rumbling and everybody wants a drink, and so I won't continue. In the words of my wife, be brief and be to the point. Okay. Well, she's not here. Flew out of Travis Air Force Base. We were on a Continental jet. It was 90% Marines, 10% corpsmen. And we're sitting in the seats, and it was really a jovial atmosphere. We're going to war, but it was, I mean, everybody was appropriate because we were in the service and we were disciplined, sort of, by that time. But it was during the miniskirt era, and the stewardesses, every time they would bend over to pass a meal, it was like a drill. There would be 100 heads. Not mine, because I was reading a hymn book, but the rest of them. So we got to Okinawa, And they gave us a Cinderella Liberty, 12 hour, until 12 midnight. We had to be back to base because we were going to Vietnam the next day. Now, at 19 or 20, whatever I was, I thought I was mature. Looking back on it at the age of 70, good Lord. Well, 4 of us went into Naha, I think it was, or Koza or whatever. Went to a bar. I'm not much of a drinker, but, you know, I want to be with friends, and so I nursed a beer along. A girl came in, beautiful girl, from outside, and she got to talking to me, and she said, "May I sit down?" I said, "Certainly, you know. And this is a lot better luck than I had in high school." So she sat down, and then another girl appeared from somewhere, and she sat down. This is the God's truth, and I know some of you in the back will say, he couldn't have been that stupid. While we were talking, I asked her, I said, "What do you do for a living?" Okay, well, now I'm 70 years old. I figured it out. She was an Okinawan Red Cross worker. Okay, whatever you want to believe. But anyway, it didn't matter because we had to be back by midnight, and we chatted a little bit, that was it, and we went back. But I tell that story for a reason, and when I finish here in just a moment, I'll explain the significance of that naivety. I remember my first day in the bush. We got to Camp Carroll. The Kilo Company was out in the bush. They came back in for one night, and then the next day, the corpsman, myself, and Ron and others joined them. And I remember, you know, walking along that path, and after a while, I had drank 3 of my 4 canteens, and at that time, believe it or not, I was a stick. I grew up as a stick. I just woke up one morning a few years ago and was fat and old. But I drank 3 canteens. I mean, steam was coming out of my ears. I thought, if there's a sniper out there, I hope to hell he sees me. I don't want to be maimed. I don't want to be killed. I just want a little flesh wound to get the hell out of here. So by the end of the day, we were almost where we were at. I was literally dragging my Unit 1 behind me, and Ross Cummings, a Lance Corporal in front of me, he says, "Doc," he says, "you want me to help you? You want me to carry that?" I would have died before I let anyone help me because I was going to make it, because these men were depending on me. And that's just the way it was. There is no way that I would have, I mean, obviously I was showing weakness. I was showing weakness, but I was going to make it. And after a few days, I felt I got acclimatized, and, you know, the rest, you know, I did make it. Those of you who were at Cantien know how dangerous it was, and we've seen. One night, and we've been shelled just about every day. One night, sleeping in the bunker, and Ross Cummings, who was the guy that had offered to help me in the first place, he was kind of an engineer type guy, and we rebuilt the bunker and put like bunk beds in it, sort of, just out of plywood. He was sleeping above me, I was sleeping below. I woke up at about 3 in the morning, and I heard this chewing. You know, I knew it wasn't Ross, he's asleep. And I heard this chewing, and I'm listening, and all of a sudden, a rat ran across my chest. Okay, well, men don't scream, so I didn't scream. I yelled at the top of my lungs. And the guy on watch came in, locked and loaded, because he thought I'll be politically correct, a North Vietnamese soldier had gotten me. And I said, "No, it was a rat. It was a rat, expletive." And I remember Ross telling me, he says, "Doc, don't ever do that again." And I think everybody within the sound of my voice for about 100 yards, because I was loud when that rat ran across my chest, probably developed dysentery. Excuse me for being, but... Another incident happened at Cantien, and this is wrapping up, believe me, honest. You can tell my wife that. Another incident at Contienne was one morning, a shell came in, and everybody hit the deck, and it was the only shell. All of a sudden, we smelled gas, and people started yelling, gas, gas. And so my gas mask was handy, several others were putting on your gas mask. Anybody that wasn't close to their gas mask has no friends, because nobody's going to share their gas mask with them. What had actually happened was we were not gassed. It was a coincidence that that shell had come in when it did, because two Marines decided that they would de-rat their bunker, and they had thrown a CS grenade in about that time, swear to God, and then that round came in. Well, coincidence, but we thought we'd been gassed. But believe me, no matter how much you think your best friend likes you, if you get gassed and you got a mask and he doesn't, or vice versa, he isn't going to share it. I'll wrap this up with saying the night of the Tet Offensive, I finally got a can of spaghetti. It was a new meal. And I hung back because, I know this sounds good now, but I believed it then. I hung back because the Marines deserved things first. And so after everybody over time had gotten this new meal, I got my can of spaghetti, which happened to be the night of the Tet Offensive opening. And I'm cooking it, and it's coming out of the can, and I'm pushing it down and stuff like that, and it's coming out of the can. And all of a sudden from the north, we were east of Contienne, as I remember it. From the north, we heard boom, 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 boom. And everybody looks, you know, and I don't know where that can of spaghetti went. I never saw it again. But everybody jumped in a hole, especially this one huge guy who didn't help dig it. And he had a hole over there. I ended up, you know you're slow when you're running for your life and you get run over. I ended up on the top of these this big corpsman that shouldn't have been in our hole in the first place, and a couple other corpsmen, and probably a Marine, laying on top. I could not get my legs completely in, and if you look over, if you happen to pass by it, there's a piece of shrapnel that I've encased for my grandchildren. I found later that it had gone, we had a round land very close to the hole. This shrapnel went through a Unit 1 medical bag and hit a tree, and the wood is still in it. And I think it came very close to my feet. I don't know. It didn't, so that doesn't matter. But I made it. We made it. I'm so happy to be here. And in closing, I would like to take a selfish moment and acknowledge the two officers that I have complete respect for Kilo Company, but especially Lieutenant Wims, who was First Company CO, whose health is a little precarious right now, but we know he'll be better. And I want to thank you, sir, for your excellent leadership. God bless you.
I made a mistake. I should have asked all the members of Kilo Company 3-4 that were with these gentlemen, whether you were at Contienne, Quezon, would you please just stand and be recognized? Thank you so much. I wanted to follow up with a couple of lines of questions maybe to throw out to the panel, and I think each of you have touched on it in a certain way. But I also wanted to follow up on the outstanding survey results and talk that Jim McGinty gave that he had done in collaboration with David Ogilvy. And the thing that was interesting to me is not only the results, but there's a contrast in the context in that that survey was done with officers who had been together during their training, then virtually to a man went to Vietnam, and I'm sure there were exceptions, but there were spread all over South Vietnam and the DMZ and who knows where. Some in aircraft, some on the ground, some in artillery. And the situation here is kind of, in a way, the opposite of that, because you are guys who came from all different walks of life, from all different places, high schools, colleges, officer training, pre-Vietnam, post-Vietnam era, and then you get to Vietnam in the same time frame, and I think almost without exception, every one of you was together with many, if not all, of these other Kilo veterans that were out there in the audience. So the perspective is very useful from the survey, but at the same time, there is a contrast there. So I wanted to ask you, there were a couple of things that Jim brought out in the survey, and also Marion talked about, and then also Professor Herring. And that had to do with the survey results on the extent to which the officers from TBS 367, while they were in Vietnam, how cognizant or interested were they in what was happening back home, particularly with regard to national political news. I think the number was over 50%, something like that. Yeah, so in that ballpark, so which is a pretty good level of interest. And so I just, taking on some of the comments that Professor Herring made, and thinking about the time frame of the Tet Offensive, which is, of course, really the thematic point of the talk, of the conference, I just jotted down a number of incidents and dates in American history. I mean, some range from the sports world, some range from the political world, and see if they jive with your recollections of the time before, during, and after Tet. In the middle of January was the second Super Bowl ever played. Just as a prelude to what's going to start happening in a couple of weeks. And then, as Professor Herring pointed out, on January 23rd, the USS Pueblo was taken by the North Korean government. But the thing that really struck me, that really coincides with the time frame for the Tet Offensive, was the American presidential political scene. So if you go back in history, February 1, the second day of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, is the date that Richard Nixon declared his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination. 1 week later, probably people don't remember this, but former Alabama Governor George Wallace declared his candidacy as a third-party candidate. And you may not remember it, but in the national election, he polled 15% of the popular vote and carried 5 states. So he was definitely a figure in the political scene. Then, in the middle of March, as Professor Herring pointed out, Gene McCarthy makes a very strong showing against Lyndon Johnson in the New Hampshire primary. 3 days later, Senator Kennedy declares his candidacy for the Democratic presidential nomination. And then 2 weeks later, at the end of March, President Johnson says, "I'm out," as far as the presidential campaign goes. So considering that you guys are in Vietnam, and you're trying to protect your own selves, obviously, as a top priority, and those of your buddies. And the Tet Offensive has come, dissipated, I guess would be one word. And now you see the ramifications of Tet and maybe the whole Vietnam policy and maybe a lot of things that are going on in the U.S. And you see these changes happening on the American political scene. Did you take note of that? Were you aware of it? Did you kind of think to yourselves, well, yes, Tet was a bad thing, and you know, the reports from back home may have been negative in terms of the policy in the Vietnam War. But what did you think about the ramifications on the political scene, or did you at all? Did you say, par for the course, or I'm not interested, or anybody take a crack at that, please?
I didn't think about it at all, to be truthful. We were too busy. I was too busy taking care of my company, making sure everybody was squared away. We had what we needed to fight any attacks that might come. I really caught up when I got home.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to say something, Bob?
Well, first of all, I want to go back real quick and clarify something. I did go back to college, and I did end up making honors. Not high honors, but I made honors, and I did graduate. And the point of that story about Okinawa and being so naive was I was immature, not worldly. When I came back from Vietnam, I was a man, and I was deadly serious about making a future for myself. and eventually my family. As far as your question, I was vaguely aware of it, but my main concern was, as Ron, my best friend in Vietnam, will tell you, I need to focus. When I focus, everything else is blotted out, and I do what I need to do. So well, I was vaguely aware of it, but it was not a big concern.
Brad, did you want to add something?
I was aware of it. I'm interested in those kinds of things, but access to information was virtually non-existent. We got Stars and Stripes, which I quickly sort of identified as a disinformation, dissemination, publication. We were involved in firefights, and I know what happened in those firefights, and I would read about it in the Stars and Stripes, and it was as though I was reading about something I hadn't even seen. So, since I didn't know what I could believe, I virtually ceased using it as a source of information because I didn't know what was true and what wasn't true. But I did have an interest in political things, but the ability to get information, at least in a timely manner, just didn't exist. We were at GLN at that point, and as Ned mentioned earlier, we were bypassed in the Tet Offensive. Mm-hmm. It was amazing because we could hear on radios what was going on elsewhere in Vietnam, but it wasn't happening to us, and it was almost surreal that we would have been bypassed at that time. But yes, those kinds of political events were of interest, but there was just not sufficient information available.
Mm-hmm. Personally, I was very aware of it for 2 or 3 reasons. One, I'd spent 2 years in the embassy in Saigon. I knew all the players. Obviously, they didn't interact with me. It was our job to guard them and to guard the facilities. But I knew who they were. I had seen them. I'd heard them talk. And I just happened to be in love with Emily Lodge, who was the ambassador's wife. But that's another long story. Another reason is that I had been kind of brought up in a political situation, particularly in high school when you become more aware of politics. You remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and my father at the time was, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, was a nuclear munitions specialist in Wiesbaden, Germany. And as you know, the Kennedy administration negotiated that we would remove our nuclear weapons from Turkey in trade for the nuclear munitions in Cuba being removed. Well, the person who took that phone call from the White House was my father. So I knew a lot about politics. I knew a lot about the players. I was very interested, but I was not involved in any way. So I did have an interest and followed it as well as I could. Just a third point, 2 of the people that were in the embassy when the embassy was attacked during the Tet Offensive were very good friends of mine. Jim Marshall was one. He was killed by a sniper on the roof on the adjoining to the embassy, new embassy compound. Was the first Marine that was ever killed on embassy duty. And the new State Department embassy school is named after Jim Marshall. Just happens to be Marshall Hall, which is at Quantico now. It used to be up at headquarters Marine Corps at Arlington. And secondly, one of my very good friends who I went through Marine Embassy Guard School with, Rudy Soto, happened to have been on the roof of the embassy the night that the Tet Offensive occurred. And he was armed with a .38 caliber revolver with 5 rounds and a Model 12 Winchester shotgun, which jammed. Totally useless. So he fired 5 rounds, locked the door. He had no idea what was going on. He was 6 floors up. He locked the door and would not let anybody up. Well, as you know, if you've actually read the history and know some of the players, the embassy was, the inside of the embassy was never penetrated. What happened was that when they blew a hole in the embassy wall, the first two Viet Cong that came through the wall were killed, and those were the two leaders. The rest of them came through the wall and they didn't know what to do or where to go. So they all ended up planting themselves in the big concrete planters that were around the new embassy. And of course the Marines reacted and took them under fire, and they never did get into the embassy. Well, Rudy Soto didn't know any of this. He fired his 5.38 rounds, locked the door, and bunkered down. About 2 hours into that, the Army dropped him a case of M16 ammo. I know you don't have to go to Marine Corps boot camp or the rifle range to understand that M16 ammo with a .38 caliber revolver and a Model 12 World War I trench gun is relatively useless. You can sit on it, but you can't shoot it at anybody. He was finally evacuated from the roof by an Army helicopter, which was then shot down south of Saigon, crashed into a rice paddy. They were rescued by another helicopter, and he arrived back at the Marine House at Tu Kong Trong Chensi in Saigon about 5 o'clock in the morning, and had some interesting stories to tell. And so that's kind of why I was aware of things that were going on. When I reported to 3-4, I found out that Jim Marshall had been killed, and I asked permission to go back to Saigon, which was granted, and I actually spent a week back in Saigon and with the Marines that were there that I knew, and then reported back to Con Tien when I came back from Saigon.
Well, I absolutely had no clue. I didn't know what was going on out in the world, and really didn't give a damn, to be honest with you. Unless Lieutenant Whitler told me anything, I didn't know it. And like I said, I wasn't concerned with what was going on out there. I had a squad to take care of, and that was the main thing on my mind, nothing else.
So I just have one last question for the panel, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience, and then we're going to introduce Cadet Sortino. So my last question is kind of like this. If you look back at your lives, so you'd all, I think by August 5th, 1964, the beginning of the Vietnam era, Gulf talking, you're all out of high school, some were beyond that, college, OCS, Texas A&M, whatever. And at that point, before August 5th, 64, probably had some kind of an idea of where you were going down the road, sort of a life plan, at least for the next months or the next couple of years or something, or maybe you didn't. Okay, then August 5th, 64, Vietnam era, then each one of you winds up going to Vietnam, you come back. If you look back at your life and you said, well, you know, there was a pre-Vietnam time as far as when I went to Vietnam, my life before Vietnam, then I came back and I had a life after Vietnam. In your cases, was it a continuous life, only with the fact that, you know, your Vietnam experience will never leave you? Or did the fact that you went to Vietnam completely change whatever plans you had down the road, if that makes sense?
I'd like to respond to that. As General Labouty referred to earlier, I came to really care for my Marines, for my colleagues in the Marine Corps, and I wanted to have a career as a Marine. I think one of the things that made me feel this way was the pride I felt in the fact that during my time in Vietnam, we lost very few people, and most everybody came home alive, are in the audience today. And that motivated me, I think, more than anything, with the exception of one individual whom I met in Philadelphia and who Williams knew intimately, was Sergeant Major Ted McClintock. And Ted McClintock became the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps Supply Activity when I was there, and as an aide-de-camp at that time, we developed a very close relationship, and he influenced me greatly in pursuing a career. We corresponded frequently while I was in Vietnam. He was in Philadelphia, and then he came to Vietnam, and unfortunately was killed in a helicopter crash over there.
Well, that's an interesting question, because when you first asked it, I think I probably would have said that it didn't really change things much, but I think it did change things, and I think it changed things a lot for me. I had known that I would probably go into the Marine Corps pretty much all my life. My father served in World War II. He was in the 1st Marine Division at Peleliu and Okinawa. And so I was sort of born and bred, I think, to follow in his trace. And so when I was at A&M, Vietnam was flaring up, and it was becoming apparent that not only was I going into the Marine Corps, but that I was going to go to Vietnam. There was no question about that. And I got some great advice from my father about that, and it was very helpful. Once I came home from Vietnam, as I mentioned earlier, I spent about a year and a half at Camp Pendleton. And then I continued on with the plan that I originally had for myself, which I'd always wanted to become a stockbroker and get involved in the investment business. And I did do that. But fortunately for me, I think that because of my experience in the Marine Corps, which I can't describe how valuable it really was, but it enabled me to do things that I think that I would never have been able to do had I not had the Marine Corps experience. And things that I even do today, I rely on what I learned in the Marine Corps. And I personally had in spite of how horrible, terrifying an experience being in Vietnam was, especially out in the Quezon area, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I treasure the time that I spent with the men of Kilo Company. We looked after each other. We did our best to accomplish our mission, and I tried my best to help bring them home, and I truly believe they did their best to help bring me home. So it was a time that words really can't describe, but I attribute whatever success I've had in life to those 3 special years that I spent.
Thanks very much.
Well, during that particular period of time, I was too young and too stupid to be profoundly moved by anything politically. I was just too young. I was totally focused on being the best Marine I could be, and reaped the rewards of that up through the summer of 1968 with 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. I made sergeant before I was 21 years old. I was leading men in combat. Totally focused on that. I think what changed, the time that changed me was a number of years later, which was during that period of time. I don't know if most people realize it, but 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines is probably the most underrated, underreported outfit that was in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. And I'll give you an example. A reinforced battalion of Marines that are totally staffed are about 1,200 men. Between the 1st of May and the 1st of July, 1968, we took 500 casualties. 500. We took 81 KIA and 419 wounded. And that was in a 60-day period. And that's what changed me. At the end of my tour in Vietnam in January '69, I had orders to be promoted to staff sergeant and to go to the drill field. And I turned that down to go to college. And I think that casualty rate and that experience, which if my interpretation is correctly, I think we took in the year that I was there 130% casualties, which was because we were in the middle of it and we did what we were supposed to do. That's what changed me. That's why I ended up going to college instead of staying in the Marine Corps.
It's great perspective. Thanks.
Yeah,
sure that anybody that was ever in Vietnam in combat, it changed them. You didn't come back the same. Now, good, bad, or indifferent, we didn't come back basket cases, but it changed you. It made you a man. A lot of responsibility to Captain LeRoy was leading the company. Lieutenant Pace was helping him lead the company. I was leading the squad. Lieutenant Whitler was leading the platoon. You got responsibility. You got men's lives at stake, so you take it serious. And I wasn't worried about what was going on in the United States. I was worried about what was going on in Vietnam at the position that where I was right then. And yeah, up there at GLN, we didn't make much ground contact, if any, but we was getting a lot of artillery and rounds. And every night at the squad leaders meeting, Lieutenant Whitler was always coming up with some nice thoughts that they was going to send MiGs down there to bomb us. And so you're always on alert. And we pulled a lot of 100% nights up there. We was on alert at GLN a lot on 100% night. First time I ever got freeze-dried coffee. Somebody had sent somebody in my squad some freeze-dried coffee, and we had some of those 100% alerts, and that was the best coffee. We was drinking that Coca-Cola coffee, out of sea rations. But we got that freeze-dried coffee, and man, that was something else. But yeah, it changes you.
It definitely changed me. It put me on the road to adulthood. And when I came back, I was an adult, a young adult, but an adult. But I felt that I had one more chance in life. I had blown it at Easter due to my own poor scholarship. And I was deadly serious about succeeding. And I feel that the service in general, being in the Navy and being with the Marine Corps, brought me up to that level of maturity for that age. And there was no way that I was going to fail when I went back to that university. And so, as I said, I didn't make high honors, but I certainly made a lot higher than I'd made the first time. And it's helped me all of my life. I'm a responsible, very caring individual, and I'll help anybody. And, well, that's until I win the lottery. But, and then you'll have to look for me. But no, I would do anything for anybody. And I felt like, for me, I've at least made some success in life. And I'm very proud of having served.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Cadet Tortino. I already gave a little bit of his bio sketch. He's a history major. As I said, he'll be graduating in May with a commission in the Marine Corps. He's already finished PLC from Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and he volunteered for this. So please, Cadet Tortino, please take a seat, and I think he has some questions of his own. Then we'll open it up to the audience, and you can ask anybody a question.
First, I want to thank Mr. Claiborne for introducing me and giving me the opportunity to be up here. It's very humbling to be up here with these Marines whose experience was compared to Tarawa and Iwo Jima. That's really not a comparison taken lightly at all. And so my first question for you gentlemen is your attitude towards the entire conflict when you first joined the service, then like immediately after your experience, both either after Comtien or after you got out of the service, and then looking back now, your attitude towards the conflict.
Well, I went over as a second lieutenant, and I was hard charging, ready to go. Captain LeRoy told me to go down and join the weapons platoon and don't say anything for 2 weeks and just listen. And it was some of the best advice I ever got. But you could sense that the public was losing confidence in the military's ability to handle the situation in Vietnam. We didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it with my men. Occasionally, someone would say, "What do you think, Lieutenant? How's it going? You know, are we going to prevail in this?" And my answer was pretty much always the same. And the answer was, we're here, we're at conflict, they're shooting at us, we're shooting at them. Don't worry about that. Worry about doing what we're supposed to do. And let's all get home, and then we can worry about who's going to win. We're going to do our best to do what we can do. But certainly, people that were there at that time were aware that we were losing momentum on the home front, and that politically, there didn't seem to be the commitment that you would think there would be to win the thing.
What a great question. I don't think I had any attitude at all except being a Marine when I was young and the Vietnam War started. You know, again, I was too young and too naive, maybe. Afterwards, I have to tell you that I happen to be a Civil War buff, and I just devour books on the Civil War. And I ran across a quote from the Civil War that I think really expressed my inner feelings about Vietnam after the Vietnam War. It was a Attorney General of South Carolina. His name was James L. Pettigrew, and he happened to be a Unionist, although he was from South Carolina. And when South Carolina seceded from the Union in 1860, he made the remark that South Carolina is too small to be a republic and too large to be an insane asylum. And if you change that just a little bit, that Vietnam was too disorganized to be a republic and too large to be an insane asylum, I think that pretty much sums up my feelings about it.
Yeah, I had no attitude about it one way or the other. My attitude was consistent all the way through, during and after, as far as I think.
It was many years before I could even open the door a crack in my conscience and admit to myself that, well, maybe it wasn't something that we should have been involved in. And that was because of the lives lost, those wounded, and all of you that made the sacrifices. But I finally reached a compromise in my conscience. We all did the very best we could. Maybe it didn't turn out like we wanted, but it wasn't because of us. We did the best we could, and we served with honor. And so even though history is beginning to say that it was not what we wanted, we did the best we could, and that's what I keep in my mind.
I'll add one more thing. When I was at Camp Geiger, and I'm sure a lot of you were at Camp Geiger, over the barracks going in, they were single stories. I don't know if there was a platoon in there or if it was big enough platoon, but over the door going into the barracks, there were signs over all of them. And the sign over my barracks was "My country, right or wrong, my country."
Captain in Philadelphia did a pretty cushy job. I was worried about whether I was going to get to Vietnam at all. My younger brother had been over there and back already, and so I was ready to go hard charging, and I was ready to be there. I guess what bothered me most is the fact that coming up through the ranks and everything, people always talked about, the commanders always talked about lessons learned, how important our lessons learned passed on to those coming after us. Well, I don't think the politicians took that seriously. For example, you can't set a line that you're not going to cross. If you're out there to win a war, you can't say, oh, fine, we can't cross this line to the Yalu River, or we can't cross over the Ben High to go after the enemy.
With that in mind, my next question is, looking back, do you agree with the United States strategy, behind the Vietnam War of containment and containing communism, and then also at the more operational level, the Army gets a lot of criticism for their search and destroy strategy, whereas the Marines developed their clear and hold tactics using combined action platoons. And I was just wondering if you felt like that was a more effective strategy against Viet Cong and NVA than what the Army was doing.
Well, I felt that we had to earn the confidence of the people, but I think there were many actions we took that negated that effort.
I echo what Ned said. Winning the hearts and minds of people is a great strategy, but it's a difficult thing to do when you're kicking their front doors down and you've got them lying out on the ground. There's an incongruity there that it seems like it should work on paper, but I think it's very difficult in practice because when a South Vietnamese person was maltreated, you not only alienated that person, you alienated everyone they knew, and you alienated all of their relatives. And I also think that to win a war, you have to turn your troops loose. You have to be able to go do what is necessary to win the war. Most of the politicians were never in a war. And as a result, I don't think they had the empathy. And I wish that, for example, in my case, I wish the Marine Corps had been allowed to do what the Marine Corps does best. Perhaps the results would have been different. Perhaps they wouldn't, but at least we would have been able to operate in a manner that I think was more effective.
I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question, except to tell you that after 70 years on this earth, I think communism is a great thing to try to contain. But I think we have to exercise some common sense in where you can do it and how you can do it. And I'm not sure that that was the strategy that we used in Vietnam. So we were all involved at the tactical level. Strategy was not something that anybody ever asked me about. I was lucky to get a few words in about what I thought we might be able to do tactically on a particular evening in Vietnam, but strategy wasn't something that ever came up in while I was in the Marine Corps. So I had a limited perspective.
Yeah, that's basically my thought too, but I think myself, and I got a high school education and combat experience, so I don't know, but when you got a Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State and the President making the calls and going against what his generals tell him to do, you got problems. McNamara didn't, I'm not going there. But it's if you're gonna fight a war, go in there to win. Take everything you got. That's kind of like getting in a fist fight with one hand tied behind your back. Go in there with everything you got, get it over, and come home. And don't.
This is my own opinion, but I think honestly, if you look back on the times, it didn't start with Cuba, but when Cuba went communist, it really traumatized the political process in the United States. And then when it appeared that Vietnam would become, South Vietnam would also become communist, and then of course the domino theory, Laos and Cambodia and on and on and on. I think that for some people there was this tremendous fear that we've got to do something, and that's what spurred that on. As far as strategy, I can't comment because my focus was helping as many people as I could and getting myself back to the United States in one piece. So I never was asked about strategy, and I wouldn't have known what to say anyway.
One more question, Cadet, if you got one.
So I think the last question will be, in light of your experience in Vietnam and the Marine Corps, what do you think about current conflicts and security concerns facing the United States today? You talk about lessons learned. Do you think that there's any that are applicable today?
Wow, that's a question. Right, I'm not sure. Actually, I am sure. I'm not qualified to answer that question. I'm not sure how much that was learned in Vietnam is applicable to terrorism today. I think the applicability may be more appropriate to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'm not sure, because I really can't comment because I don't know what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. I do know what went on in Vietnam, but I can't make a comparison.
I don't think there's any question that we had to respond somehow after 9/11. And how we responded can be criticized, certainly in hindsight. But at the time, Americans were united in the fact that we had to respond, and I think we had to respond. The current conflicts and the current strategies that are employed, not tactically, but strategically, lack a common element that tempers what politicians need to think about. And that is the casualties that are taken on the ground by the people that are fighting the war. And if you don't have people like us on the ground fighting the war, then you're not going to win. You're not going to win. You can drop all the bombs and fly all the drones and do all the airstrikes and whatever you want. But you don't put troops on the ground and go after the bad guys and kill them, you're not going to win. So that's my thought about it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And it looks like to me, from what I can see on the news and read in the paper, that they're fighting these wars just like they did Vietnam. They're not going in to win. President Obama says he wants to contain. Well, I don't know how you contain. You got to go in to win. And putting rules and regulations on the infantry, and just like in Vietnam on holidays, if we was on patrol, which we never did, but now hypothetical, if you was on patrol and there was a company NVA in front of you, you couldn't call in an airstrike, you couldn't call in artillery, you couldn't fire. And the only thing, during the holidays, you had to be fired at before you could return fire. And that's just, when you start handcuffing the infantry and the military, you got problems.
I think that we should have gone in, but I also think that one should consider when you do go in and you disrupt the system and the government of the country, which that's what you're there to do, you cannot leave a political vacuum because it will be filled with ISIS-type people. So there has to be a plan B after you achieve plan A.
Okay, thank you all again. And we have time for maybe 2 questions from the audience if there is anyone who would like to ask. Yes, stand up. Use the mic, please.
Let me just wrench it down from global concerns and global tactics. And can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Based on what we saw in the video, you were in an environment where it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when that you would get either wounded or killed or something horrible could happen to you. You being in a leadership position, as many of you as we all were, how do you keep the fear that you have and the fear that your troopers have, and that, how do you keep that in control? What is your strategy? How do you work as a company commander when a trooper comes to you all stressed out and says, Jesus, you don't get me off this hill, I'm going to kill myself because I'm going to die anyway? How do you control that? What is your strategy? Where did you learn that?
You've got to put your warrior face on. Is what I think you have to do. You got to swallow your fear, no matter how much you feel it. You have to set the example. You're the leader up there, and you've got to set the example for your troops, and trust that they'll follow it. Also, you have to give them what they need to protect themselves in terms of equipment, weapons, and so forth. That's about all I can say on that.
I don't really have anything significant to add other than that when you're in a perimeter, there's always a lot to do. And you may go days when nothing happens. And during those days when nothing's happening, you're busying yourself by putting out listening posts, ambushes, going on patrols, and you go about your business and you develop a routine where you're taking care of the things that you're supposed to take care of. Cleaning rifles, making sure that all of the gear is in great shape. And so I think that if, as a leader, you're doing what you're supposed to do, then I think it is encouragement for everyone else to do what they're supposed to do. And that's what makes the Marine Corps work, in my opinion, is where it's most effective is when we can each rely upon the other to do exactly what they're supposed to do. And if everyone does what they're supposed to do, then it works.
I completely agree. Leadership is about example, period. You set the example and men will follow you. We had magnificent leadership in Vietnam. And we had magnificent men in Vietnam. And I think they don't get the credit they deserve in either case.
When I got to Vietnam, I was scared of shadows. What's behind that bush? Is there something here? Is there something there? And I was uneasy all the time. And then I read a passage one time, and it said, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a brave man dies but once." And so I accepted the fact that I wasn't going to get out of Vietnam alive. I was going to get killed in Vietnam. So why worry about it? And then I put my faith in these men sitting up here. And they was excellent leaders. And they got me home. And we got all of our men home. I lost one man, and that was from incoming. It wasn't because we walked into an ambush. We never walked into an ambush. So these men right here brought me home.
I'm totally unqualified to even respond at all to that, except to say that thank God we had the leadership that we had, and that was what it was all about. I did what I was told because I had competent people directing me.
One last question.
1st Battalion, 9th Marines had Cantien and the Trace all the way to Jiolin and up to the DMZ before apparently you came in, Captain. On the hilltop, the very top of the hill, was a big bunker. The 19CO used it as his command bunker, had good communications from there. The problem is all those communications antennas were sticking up in the air 10 and 15 feet. It was like an aiming stake for the North Vietnamese, be that as it may. On July the 7th, that bunker took a direct hit from NVA artillery. The bunker essentially was destroyed. Tell me what happened to it by the time you got there. That was July 7, 1967.
I think Lieutenant Wims could probably answer this a little better, but I'm going to ask him to do so after I say this. That, in my understanding, when I got to Contien, was that the command bunker, we understood that it had been hit. It was moved behind the hill and dug in deeply and reinforced as a die marker type bunker. Peter, you want to speak to that? You were there.
I think we're talking about the microphone. So by the old I'm not entirely sure, but I know that there was a destroyed bunker behind my lines up near where the French minefield was. I'm not, I don't know anything about antennas and aiming stakes and all of that.
I can tell you the bunker was destroyed because I was in the damn thing when the round came through the 12 by 12 timbers and sandbags that were on it. Praise God, I'm here talking about it.
On that note, thank you so much for everybody. And with that, we'll close the conference for today and thank all the sponsors, the speakers, the special guests, the session chairs, and our panel this afternoon. Thank you all. Well done, sir. Whose phone is this? Oh, hey, how you doing?
About Virginia Buller.
Let me say hello. Cadet. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, thanks so much. Great to see you.